History, Paper 1 for the Prelim exam for Gauteng province. Right, we are going to go through the set of questions, and we are going to also try to explain the possible responses to the given set of questions. So we see our paper, that is our paper 1, which is 3 hours and which is 150 marks. As usual, it's a choice of either two source-based questions in one essay, or two essays and one source-based question, to get a total of 3 questions with 50 marks each, to give us a total of 150 marks in 3 hours. Right. So we're going to go through the questions, the source-based questions. We're going to focus on question number 1, which is the origins of Cold War. And we're going to look at question number 2, which is independent Africa, which is a case study for Angola. And we're also going to try to look at essay questions. We're going to look at the Cold War essay, which is the Vietnam case study. And also we're going to try to analyze the independent Africa essay, which is a case study for the Congo. Right, without wasting much of the time, we need to go to the questions and try to figure out the possible responses to the questions. Right, we're going to start with question number 1. The focus of the question is saying, how did the struggle for control and influence between the United States of America and the Soviet Union contribute to Cold War tensions in Europe from 1947? That is our focus for the question. So we are looking at the struggle for control and influence between the USA and the USSR. We understand that these were the two major players in the Cold War tensions. The USA on the side of capitalism and the Soviet Union on the side of communism. So we want to look at how the struggle between those two extreme ends in the need to have influence over the world politics, and also on the need to have control over world political activities. How did it contribute to the tension between the two extreme ends of communism and capitalism? Right. So we go on to our question. We'll get question number 1. The first question is saying, read source A. According to the source, when did Kennan's ideas, which became the basis of the Truman administration's foreign policy, first come to public attention? This is an extraction question. It's a 1-mark question, which is an extraction question. We just need to go to the source and extract the relevant answer. The question is saying, according to the source, when. When a question is saying when, automatically it means it is referring to the time factor. We want to figure out the time factor. The question is saying when. When we are referring to time. Right. So we go to our source and try to figure out from the first source. And also, as you are going through the source, you are also supposed to figure out the context of the source. This source here, source 1A, is the source below is taken from U.S. Department of State Archives. It explains the 8,000-word telegram by George Kennan, an American diplomat living in Moscow, which was sent to President Truman's State Department. Kennan's long telegram formed the basis of American policy towards the Soviet Union from 1947. So our question is saying when. Right. We extract our answer here. Kennan's ideas, which became the basis of the Truman administration as foreign policy, first came to public attention in 1947. So we extract our response there. Our response is 1947. So it came to public attention in 1947. That is our response. Right, moving on to the next question. The question is saying, explain the concept containment. Containment in your own words. Containment, what is to contain? What is being contained here in the context of Cold War tensions? When you're looking at containment, basically, it is in simple understanding is the stopping of the spread of communism. That's the simple understanding of the concept of containment. When we're talking of containment, we are looking at a situation whereby the capitalists were trying by all means to stop USSR from creating as many spheres of influence across the world. We are looking at a situation whereby the capitalists, they did not want Russia to spread its influence across sovereign states of the world. Mainly what it did, what the US did in East Europe, it was spreading its ideology in most of the countries in East Europe, and also it was trying to influence other countries across the world to follow the idea of communism, including in Asia, where we are going to look at the Vietnamese case study. Right. So that was that's the concept of containment. Right. Next question says, explain what is implied by the statement. He called for countering Soviet pressure against the free institutions of the Western world in the context of the United States strategy. What is implied by the statement? He called for countering Soviet pressure against free institutions. What you need to address, you need to address the effect of countering, and you need to address the issue of pressure against the free institutions. Right. So what is the implication there? We are seeing that statement is saying, explain what is implied by the statement. He called for countering Soviet pressure against the free institutions of the Western world in the context of the United States strategy. So we can say the US in its strategy, USA, it wanted to stop USSR from creating spheres of interest. Right, we can safely say the USA wanted to stop the USSR from creating spheres of interest or spheres of influence. He called for countering. By countering, we are saying they are trying to bar or they are trying to block Soviet pressure against free institutions. They were imposing their ideas upon sovereign states, upon independent states. They were forcibly imposing their idea by either trying to force into office leaders who were pro-communism, or by trying to influence the government which are there to change their ideology to communism. So USA wanted to stop that. And also we can say, this is a 2-by-2 question. We can safely say the USA also in other dimension, the USA wanted to stop or to contain the spread of communism. We can also safely say USA wanted to stop the spread of communism. That's the idea behind the statement. It's basically a containment theory. It's basically a containment ideology where the USA is seeking to bar Russia from influencing independent states by imposing its ideology on them. Right. Comment on why you think the Soviet expansion was regarded as a threat to the major centers of industrial power in the world. The Soviet expansion was regarded as a threat to major centers of industrial power. We are looking at those countries that were having industrial power. If the influence of Russia was going to spread into those countries, it was going to be a threat. Comment on why you think Soviet expansion was regarded as a threat to major centers of industrial power in the world. Right, we are seeing a situation there whereby the influence of communism in other dimension, influence of communism was going to hinder, was going to affect in one dimension. Saying, if we try to figure out in the first paragraph, it states that in relation to that, right, we are seeing a situation there whereby the influence of communism in other dimension, influence of communism was going to hinder, was going to affect productivity. in one dimension. They're going to affect productivity in those industrial powers. How are they going to affect? We know communism as an economic system is an ineffective economic system. It's non-effective. It requires the government to take control of everything. And we know that the government in most instances is very ineffective in managing economic affairs. So we cannot have a government of communism which is running, like, for example, areas of raw material production, which are needed in industrial or in the industrialized world. The source below is an extract from Nikolai Novikov, the Soviet ambassador to the United States between April 1946 and October 1947. In September 1946, Novikov reported to Moscow in response to George Kennan's long telegram. So this is a response to the telegram which we have just been using for the first source. It's a response from the other side in relation to what was posted in that long telegram. Right. So we go to our questions. We'll just have to figure out what sense is required from the source. Right. The source is saying, the question is saying, according to the source, what does the foreign policy of the United States reflect? What does the foreign policy of the United States reflect? This is an extraction question. We have to go to the source and extract the relevant information from the source. Right. It is saying, if we try to figure out in the first paragraph, it states that in relation to that, right, the foreign policy of the United States, which reflects the imperialistic tendencies of America, monopolistic, which is sole control, capital, is featured in the post-war period by a striving for world supremacy. That is where we extract our answer from. So what does it reflect? That is our question. It reflects the imperialist tendencies of American monopolistic sole state or capital, which is characterized in the post-war period by a striving for world supremacy. That is the foreign policy, according to the reflection by Nikolai Novikov. He's saying America is having an imperialistic tendencies, meaning to say it wants to dominate and extend its influence into other countries. And also it wants to adopt a monopolistic, a sole control of capital, controlling the world capital. And also is featured by a post-war period after the Second World War. Americans were striving for world supremacy, meaning to say they wanted to be the biggest functioning economy. They wanted to be the most notable economy across the whole world economies. That's the foreign policy according to the reflection by Nikolai Novikov. Right, moving on to the next question. The next question is saying, quote 3 ways from the source that explain how the plans for the expansion by the United States were developed and implemented. Right, this is an extraction question again. We want to quote 3 ways from the source. We just have to go to the source and just figure out where we get our responses. Right, if we try to go to the second paragraph, is saying for this purpose, broad plans for expansion have been developed and are being implemented through diplomacy and the expansion of a system of naval and air base stretching from as far beyond the boundaries of the United States through the arms race and through the creation of ever newer types of weapons. Right. So the plans for expansion by the United States, how were they developed and how were they implemented? We are looking at the development of the plans and the implementation. America wants to expand. How are they trying to expand? What methods of expansion are they trying to come out with? How are they developing them and how are they putting them into practice? So we get our responses from that source, from that paragraph, where we are told that it is through diplomacy and also the establishment of a system of naval and air bases, stretching far beyond the boundaries of USA, and also through arms race, and also the creation of newer types of weapons. So diplomacy, a system of naval and air bases, and also through arms race and through the creation of ever newer types of weapons. Those are the ways in which the USA is trying to develop and implement its plans for expansion. Right, so it's an extraction question. We'll get the answers from the source like that. Moving on to the next question. It says, question number 1.2.3. Explain the concept foreign policy in the context of the USSR during the Cold War. What is a foreign policy in the context of the USSR's strategy in dealing with other nations across the world and also dealing with international organizations? So we want to analyze and see how Russia was dealing with. So when you're looking at the concept of foreign policy, we are looking at, in general, we're saying is the government, strategy in dealing with other nations. Or we can also include the international community. That's foreign policy in simple understanding. Foreign policy, we are saying foreign countries. How should we deal with foreign countries? We are a nation on our own. We must decide on how we must deal with other countries. What is our approach in dealing with other countries? So if you are looking at the context of the USSR, here, its foreign policy, it was that of spreading its ideas of capitalism, of communism. It was having that ideology with dealing with other foreign countries of creating spheres of influence in foreign states. That was the foreign policy of the USSR. It wanted to create as many spheres of interest across the world. That is how it was relating with other countries. It wanted to ultimately impose its ideology on other countries. That was the target by the USSR, to try and influence countries of the world to follow its ideology of communism. That was its foreign policy. Right. So moving on to the next question. Comment on the usefulness of this source to a historian researching the expansionist policy of the United States. Right. When you're looking at this one here, we want to analyze the usefulness. Right, when you're looking at usefulness, always remember, we are trying to find information of substance, something which is tangible, something which is meaningful, something which gives insight to a given historical concept. So we want here to evaluate the usefulness of this source to a historian who wants to research on the expansionist policy of the USA. What does the source tell us about the approach by the USA in its expansionist policy, in its need to expand its influence across the world? Right. If we check in this source here, this source basically, we can say it's useful because it highlights the USA expansion plans. Right, it highlights the plans by the USA, how it wanted to expand. The plans are indicated in the source. So it's useful information that we get to know the plans that the US was using in trying to adopt its expansionist policy. And also, that source, it also tells us about how the plans were developed. The source gives us information on how those expansionist policies were developed. We have analyzed that. And also the source tells us about how the plans were implemented. The implementation of the plans are indicated in the source. How did they want to put the plans into action? It's also indicated in the source that we have there. So basically, if you are looking at those aspects, we can say the source is useful because it's giving us tangible information about the expansionist policy of the USA. One, by giving us the plans of expansion. How did the USA target to expand its influence across the world? And how were those plans developed? We get an insight onto that. And also we get to figure out the implementation of such plans. How were they put into action? Right, so basically when looking at the usefulness of a source, you must figure out something which is of substance, something which is meaningful that you get from that particular source. Right, let's move on to the next question. The next question is number 1.3. Refer to source 1A and 1B. Explain how the information in source 1A differs from the evidence in source 1B. Right, we understand when we are contrasting sources, we use that very format where we say source 1A says this, and this differs from source 1B, which says whatever. So we just need to identify ideas which show contrast there or which show differences between the two sources. Right. So from the two sources, without going back to the sources, we can figure out that I'll put source A here, and then I'll put source B here to show the difference. Right. So what does source 1A saying? Source 1A is saying USSR is imposing pressure against free institutions. That is the picture in source 1A. He's saying the USA is imposing pressure against free institutions. They want to impose their ideas on countries which are free and independent. And what does source 1B say, which is different from that? If you check source 1B, it says the USA is strengthening democratic tendencies, which is different. Imposing pressure against free institutions and advocating for democracy is different. They are imposing their ideology on free institutions. Free institutions, we are saying, those institutions are already democratic. They are already free. They are already having the liberty that they deserve. The people are already free in those institutions, in those countries, in those states. But we are seeing the USA trying to impose pressure on those countries, which is different from what the source B is saying. He's saying the USA in its foreign policy is strengthening democratic tendencies across the divide. So it's differences between those two sources. It's one difference. Remember, this is a 2-by-2 question. You must figure out two different responses, two independent responses to the question for you to get 4 marks. Each comparison will be having 2 marks. So you need to figure out another difference. And you can also say the USSR's policy, it was adopting it was having an expansive tendencies. It's indicated in the first source that the USSR was adopting expansive tendencies. It wanted to expand its influence across the whole divide, across East Europe and also across other independent states, the free institutions. And if we check in B, what does B say? It is saying the USSR was giving economic and political assistance, which is different. If we compare the stance here, expansive tendencies is just expanding, trying to gain influence across the world. It's trying to influence its ideologies, countries to adopt its ideologies through its expansive tendencies. But however, in source B, is not portraying it the same. He's saying the US is just giving economic and political assistance. It's not expanding to anyone else. It's not influencing any free state, any free institution. It's not trying to dominate other states, but rather it's just assisting economically and politically. So we see how we show the differences between our two sources. Right, and remember, we just use the format source 1A says this, and this differs from source 1B, which says whatever. and you give 2 responses. Right, moving on to source C. Right, our source C, let's check the context of the source. The source is saying, source 1C, the source below is from the general records of the United States government. It outlines how the USA wanted to contain the spread of communism in Europe. Right, that's the context of the source. Moving to the questions. Right, the first question is saying, what, refer to source 1C, according to the source, what were the conditions in Europe like when World War II ended? We want to look at the conditions in Europe after the ending of Second World War. The conditions are definite. We'll get them from the source. Right, what does the source say? We're going to pick the conditions here. Europe lay in ruins. The first line, Europe lay in ruins. How ruined was Europe? Its cities were shattered. Its economies were devastated. Its people faced famine. Those are the conditions. Having cities which are shattered, economies which are devastated, people facing famine. Right. It's an extraction question. Name the act that President Truman passed in 1948. It's an extraction question again. We come here. It says, Congress overwhelmingly, that is paragraph number 2, sentence number 2, starting from Congress. Congress overwhelmingly passed the Economic Cooperation Act of 1948. And on April 3, 1948, President Truman signed the act, which became known as the Marshall Plan. So our response for the next question there is the Marshall Plan. That was the act which was signed by the president, by President Truman. He signed the Marshall Plan. Right. Why do you think President Harry Truman sent a message to Congress to provide economic aid to Europe in December 1947? What was the rationale for President sending to the Congress that they must provide economic aid to Europe? Right. So we want to figure out the reasons there. Why President had to send a message to the Congress so that they would provide economic aid. One and the most definite reason that we have seen there, we have seen that economies were devastated. European economies were devastated by the Second World War. They needed assistance. World War II had devastated the economies of Europe. Is one definite response why Truman had to send a message to the Congress to provide economic aid. There was need for economic aid because economies were devastated. There was also famine. There were problems of housing shortages across Europe because of the devastation that was caused by the Second World War. And also, if we check in the source, we also find ideas of why they had to send aid to the European countries, right? Like if we try to check here, right, it also say the Marshall Plan, it provided markets for American goods. Indirectly, they were having a market for American goods. If countries were given the Marshall Plan aid, they were going to buy from America because American economy was thriving by then, while the European economy was doing bad. So it was also going to be effect that American products were going to be bought by the Europeans if they got that Marshall aid. And also, it was also helping in establishing reliable trading partners. And also, the development of stable democratic governments. Remember, capitalism was supposed also to have influence in Europe by advocating for democracy. So by giving out the Marshall Plan, it was also an indirect way of trying to convince countries to follow capitalism by the USA, though it was an indirect way of trying to influence countries into that direction. But however, their purpose of achieving democracy was also going to be realized through the plan. So that's the rationale why Truman had to call for the Congress to offer assistance to European economies. Right, moving on to the next part, we are moving on to Mention two provisions in the source that enabled European recovery. Two provisions which enabled European recovery. We just go to the source. This is an extraction question. We just have to find our responses from the source. Right, we want two provisions. The third paragraph says, over the next 4 years, Congress appropriated or allocated $13.3 billion for European recovery. This aid provided the much needed capital and materials that enabled Europeans to rebuild the continent's economy. So the response is capital and materials. Those were the two provisions that were required to recover the economies of Europe. They needed capital and also they needed materials. Right, moving on to the next question is source 1D. Explain why we would consider the title Step on It, Doc, to be an appropriate caption for the cartoon. Step on it, Doc. Right. Let's analyze our source here and see. We are seeing here, this is a cartoon which is titled Step on It, Doc, by Roy Justus. It appeared in the Minneapolis Star newspaper on 29 November 1947. It depicts the US strategy of the policy of containment. So we are seeing, the title is Step on It, Doc, and we are seeing the US Congress here being the doctor. And the doctor is rushing to Western Europe. And we are seeing communism being depicted as a vulture here flying over the doctor rushing to Western Europe. So the title is saying Step on It, Doc. Step on it. Step on it here. The step on it basically is implying on the vehicle that is being used by the doctor going to Western Europe. He was supposed to step on that vehicle. He was supposed to speed up the reaction towards Western Europe, as we are seeing in the picture. So why is it the title appropriate? Right. The title is appropriate because there was need for swift action. It's appropriate because there was need for swift action. European economies were in a dire straits. There was need for swift action or fast action to revive the economies of Europe. On recovery. Which means the doctor was supposed to step on it, was supposed to rush, was supposed to increase speed to get to rescue the economies that were endangered by the implications of the Second World War. And also it was relevant to counter USSR. It was also relevant for the doctor to step on it to counter the USSR. We are seeing the USSR as a vulture there. It was going to prey on countries in West Europe because of the situation that the countries were experiencing. It was going to dominate those countries. So there was need to counter USSR before it gets to influence those countries. Right. So basically, that's the idea behind the statement Step on it, Doc. Right. 152. Why do you think communism is depicted as a vulture in the cartoon? We are seeing here, communism is depicted as this figure here. This is communism. Why is it a vulture? Why is it depicted as a vulture? We know well that a vulture, it preys on the dead animals. That's the feeding trend of the vulture. It identifies dead bodies and it preys on those dead bodies. It feeds on those dead bodies, on the weaker economies. The economies of Europe were weak economically, and hence it was easier for the USSR to get to influence those economies because they were already weak. They were not functioning well. So it was going to prey on those weaker economies to spread its ideology. The same way a vulture takes advantage of a dead animal to feed itself was the same way that the USSR was going to also use to gain momentum over weaker economies of Europe. They were weak and they could not defend themselves. And hence it was going to be easy for the USSR to impose its ideology on those weaker economies. Right. I'll move on to the next question, number 153. Use the information from the source and your own knowledge to explain how the US Congress responded to the danger of communism as shown in the cartoon. How did they respond? Right. So if we check there, we can say they took a swift action. As indicated by the speed of that vehicle, we can see that it's speeding. They took a swift action before communist invasion. It was a dangerous situation for communism to ultimately get to West Europe before the coming of the aid to those economies. They had to take a swift action. They had to speed up to get to assist those economies before they were invaded by the USSR. And also, in other terms, we can say they had to issue out large sums of money to speed up the recovery process. They had to give us large sums of money for them to speed up the recovery process. And also, if we check, is labeled here. If we check on our voucher, it's labeled chaos. What is the implication of the word chaos here? Right. It means that how the US Congress responded to the danger of communism. Right. How they had to respond there. They also had to respond quickly to avoid USSR bringing chaos to European states. The USSR was bringing chaos. So for the fact that they were going to bring confusion in the European states, they had to quickly avoid such. The coming of the confusion was supposed to be avoided in as quick as possible so that it was not supposed to reach Europe before the intervention by the USA. Right, then the last question is our paragraph question. Using the information in these relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of about 8 lines, which is 8 words, explain how the struggle for control and influence between. Paragraph question is written in the PIL format. We want an independent point, then you explain your point, and then you substantiate with source evidence, then you link back to the line of argument or to the answer. So here, our point, the question is saying, explain how the struggle for control between and influence between the USA contributed to Cold War tensions. How did it contribute? So as an example, I will pick my point like the struggle for control and influence between the USA and the Soviet Union. It facilitated my point here. I will say it facilitated the creation of distinct foreign policies and acts. That is how I'm answering the question. How did explain the struggle for the control and influence? Either of the two, the USA and the USSR, they were struggling to have control, and they were also struggling to have influence. over world economies. So how did it contribute to world tensions? Those two countries, they started developing distinct policies. They started developing their own unique foreign policies, how they were supposed to deal with foreign countries. And also they started developing acts in relation to gaining control and gaining influence. That's my answer. Then I'll explain. What am I saying here? My explanation, I'm using my own words. I'm not picking anything from any source. Right. I would say maybe the USA was threatened by USSR expansion. And hence, what did it do? It wanted to contain it. What about the USSR? The USSR felt the USA wanted to dominate. World affairs. I'm explaining in my own words, supporting the fact that there was creation of distinct foreign policies. What was the idea there? It was an idea of a field that were being threatened. The USA is feeling that its USSR is spreading. The spread of communism is like spreading like wildfire. Then what must we do? We must find a way of stopping it. We must contain it. The USSR is also feeling that the USA wants to dominate the whole world. After the Second World War, the post-war situation of the USA is that it wants to dominate the affairs of the world. Then what is going to happen there? We can pick some evidences from the sources. USA wanted to counter Soviet pressure. That is in source 1A. You indicate your source, you put in brackets. So we see the USA is targeting to counter Soviet pressure because it is imposing pressure on other states and it wants to contain that pressure. And if you go to source 1B, it also says the USSR, it provided economic and political assistance to neighboring countries, which is also further widening the tension. They are strongly becoming enemies because of their effects, which are created through their policies. The foreign policies are allowing the USSR to give economic and political assistance to neighboring countries, which is further worsening the tension from the USA. Why are you giving economic support and political support to other countries? It's a threat to us. Then you can also figure out some other evidence from, like, for example, source 1C, the USA enacted the Marshall Plan. This is an act. And by the Marshall Plan, we are seeing that it's further worsening the tension. The tension by the from the USSR side. They are feeling threatened by the fact that USA is giving out money. They want to buy support to their side of capitalism. You are giving evidence to support the fact that these countries, they are enacting some acts and also they are adopting some distinct foreign policies. They are dealing with foreign countries in a given direction to influence or to gain control of those foreign countries. Then you link back to your line of argument. How is this answering the question? Whatever you have said here, it's showing that these countries were adopting policies to gain influence and were implementing some acts to gain control over the world politics. That is how you answer your paragraph. You must start by creating a line of argument, which is an independent answer to the question. You figure out evidences. You explain in your own words, then you figure out evidence from the sources, relevant sources, and you link back to your line of argument. Right, that takes us to the end of the first question. Then we need to look at the Angola question, a case study for independent Africa. Right. Our question is saying, why was the outcome of the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale significant in the influencing the political landscape of Southern African region from 1987 to 1990? That is the focus of our question. Right, without wasting time, we move to the first question. Our first question is based on source 2A, which is the source below is taken from a book by a British foreign correspondent, F. Brickland, titled The War for Africa, 12 Months That Transformed the Continent. It outlines why the South African government decided to assist UNITA at Cuito, Cuanavale, Angola. Right. That besides the point, we leave the source. We're going only to use the source where it is required. Right. List the 3 colonels involved in the meeting known as the Night of the 3 Colonels. This is a level 1 and an extraction question. We don't need to waste time. We just have to go to the source and find those 3 people who are being asked in the question. Right. It says here, the meeting between Harris, Olsik, and the officer commanding the South African Defence Force Northwest Namibian sector, who was Colonel Piet at Harrisfield, south of Lomba River, became known as the Night of the 3 Colonels. So these are the 3 individuals: Harris 1, Olsik 2, and Piet. It's an extraction question. The next question is what, according to the source, did General Rafael del Pino Diaz regard as the best tactic that needed to be used to stop the FAPLA from advancing to Mavinga? Right, that one also is an extraction question. We just want to go to the source and pick where the response is. Right, it says here, by now, the CIA was sending the SADF intelligence assessment on the FAPLA or the Cuban build-up. Based on the debriefing of General Rafael del Pino Diaz in Virginia after his defection from Cuba, which was almost concluded, Del Pino advised was that cutting the Menonque-Cuito Cuanavale supply road was the best and most logical way of stopping offensive. So he opted for the cutting of the Menonque-Cuito Cuanavale supply road, as was the best and logical way of stopping the offensive. That was the best way to stop the offensive. So, according to his interpretation of the war situation, he advocated for the cutting of that supply road to ultimately deprive people of the supply of essentials in the war. Right. So moving on to the next question, we move on to the next question. The next question is, using the information in the source and your own knowledge, explain why the CIA decided to assist South African government at Cuito Cuanavale. We are looking at the CIA, which is the intelligence of the USA. Right. Why did they decide to assist South African government at Cuito Cuanavale? South Africa was also involved in Angola through Namibia. So why did the CIA try to assist the South African army? Right. The most obvious reason that we can use here is the fact that South Africa was an ally of capitalism. South Africa was an ally of capitalism. It was one of the players dominating, who were adopting the ideas of communism, the apartheid government. So by them aligning their side of ideology to the side of the USA, it was justified that the USA would assist them in the fight. Since they were fighting for the same ideology, they were fighting for Angola to become a capitalist state. So the USA had to intervene and assist them because they were allies in the same format of economic ideology of capitalism. Right. Then it says, court evidence from the source which suggests that the South African government did not approve Colonel's first plan to stop the Cuban forces from advancing. We want to find evidence from the source which suggests that they could not accept the decision. The first plan, if we come here, it says, The South African cabinet instead approved the commander's secondary plan. It approved the secondary plan. We are seeing the situation there. Meaning to say they did not approve the first plan. The fact that it says the cabinet instead approved the commander's secondary plan, it means they did not approve the first plan. Right, the next question is saying, comment on how the international perception of South Africa's policies influenced its military decisions during the conflict. Comment on how international perception of South Africa's policies influenced its military decisions during that particular time. Right. So we are seeing South Africa here in a dilemma. It was following the apartheid, it was adopting the apartheid policy, and those policies, they were against humanity, and countries of the world were ultimately against South Africa adopting such practices against humanity. So it also influenced its military decisions during the conflict. How did the perception? South Africa was having a negative perception. Countries of the world, they were perceiving South Africa as bad because of its internal policies. But however, how did that perception influenced its military decisions during the war? We can safely say South Africa joined the battle. For what reason? To gain international recognition. By aligning with the USA. For the fact that South Africa wanted also to regain its recognition across the world, it had lost its image because of its practices. It was forced to go into the war to prove to the USA that it was a strong anti-communist. And also it wanted to gain popularity by relating itself to the USA. So it influenced how it was perceived by countries of the world. They wanted to cover up for that by joining in the battle and also joining on the side of the USA to cover up for their flaws. They wanted to relate well to the USA and to cover up for their flaws in their own internal policies. And also, if we check, if we look at communist, apartheid was against communism. Was against communist ideologies. That is blank. Apartheid was a discriminatory policy. So it was against communist ideologies. And hence, South Africa had to join the conflict. So as what? So as to stop communism from coming into the region. So as to stop communism in the region. Remember, South Africa was threatened by the coming of communism. If communism was going to spread in the region, automatically it meant that it was also going to come into South Africa. And remember also South Africa made an attempt, not an attempt rather, it ultimately banned the South African Communist Party for the reasons that it was advocating for equality, which was against the apartheid principles. And hence, it was also a threat for communism to come into the region. Ultimately, they were going to support the liberation movement in South Africa to fight against the irregularities of apartheid and apparently remove the government. So they felt threatened by the coming of communism into the region. If Angola was going to be communist, remember the domino theory. If one country adopts communism, then it will spread to the other neighboring countries and ultimately come into South Africa from Angola. Then what was going to happen? The government was going to lose its position because of the coming of communism into the country. Then the next question is saying, identify 3 areas that the Cuban or the FAPLA front stretched across. This is an extraction question. We just have to go to the source and extract the relevant information which answers the question. Right. Our answers, we find them here. Right. It says, We want to look at the stretch. The question is saying 3 areas. Right, the night of the 3 colonials, the CIA, and it talks about the decision highest level PW Botha. Right. So when analyzing this source here, we are seeing that the 3 areas, according to the source, is an extraction question which comes from the first part here. It's stretched from Namibia on the coast, and also a railway line through Lumbago and Menonke. And also we are seeing and to Cuito Cuanavale in the east. Those are the 3 areas. A front that stretched from Namibia on the coast, 1. A railway line through Lumbago and Menonke, 2. And to Cuito Cuanavale in the east. Those are the 3 areas. Right, the next question is question number 2.22. The question says, provide evidence from the source explaining why Fidel Castro exercised restraint and avoided marching into Namibia. Why did the Cuban forces took precaution and they avoided just marching into Namibia? Right, we find evidence from the source. Our evidence, we go to the source and just extract our evidence. Right, it says the Cubans could have marched into Namibia, but exercised restraint. All parties, including the USA and the Soviet Union, sought compromise and a way forward in negotiations that had previously been going nowhere. Castro was not looking for a bloody encounter that would have cost men lives on both sides, and neither were apartheid generals political leaders. They could afford casualties even less than the Cubans, considering the popular mass struggle, escalating armed operations within South Africa and the ANC armed to Mkondo Sizwe. Right. So the reason why Fidel Castro took a restraint here, he was not looking for a blood encounter that would have cost men lives on both sides. He did not want a situation which was going to be bloody. He took restraint. He took a restraint upon entering Namibia. He could not just march into Namibia because it was going to cause a blood encounter with the enemy. And that blood encounter would have costed a lot of lives on either side. So that was the reason. It's an extraction question. We'll pick it from the source. Right, let's move on to the next question. The next question is question number 2.3. Define the term liberated in the context of the Angolan Civil War. When you are liberated, what would have happened to you if you are liberated? Liberated, in just simple understanding, we are saying you are released from restraint. Or you are set free. So relating it to the context of the Angolan Civil War, we are ultimately saying the negotiations that later on happened, it led to the Angolans being set free from the fighting that was taking place. They were released from a difficult situation of infighting, of civil dispute. That is liberated. All right, we move on to the next question, number 2.24. Comment on the implication of the statement. Reading the Cubans is yet another art form. They are prepared for both war and peace. Regarding the Cubans' approach during the Angolan Civil War. Right, the first part is saying reading Cubans is yet another art form. They are prepared for both war and peace. What does that imply? Is yet another art form. It means on the side, it was difficult to predict whether the Cubans would negotiate for peace or would opt to continue fighting. That's the implication of the statement. Reading Cubans is yet another art form. It was difficult to predict that if the Cubans were going to opt for peace or they would opt for continued fighting. Explain why a historian would consider this source reliable. What the battle are reliable regarding the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale. Right, why would a historian consider it as a reliable source? Right, if you check the writer of that source, it was written by a politician and a former fighter. So it's most likely reliable. It's a person who was involved in the battle. Written by a politician and former fighter. So it's reliable based on the author of the source. A source written by a historian, someone who was involved in the and is currently practicing politics, is currently in the politics field. So it's most likely to be reliable for the fact that a person is involved in political issues and also is a former fighter. And you can also say this source here about the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale, it's also corroborating. If you check with source A, corroborates with other sources, mainly source A. The information in the source is aligning with other sources, so we can rely on that. And also, we can also say this is a reliable source for the fact that it talks about the struggle in SA by the MK and also the conscripts. We know this happened in South Africa, according to South African history, and is trying to figure out the problems that were also in South Africa. The struggle by is informative. It's an informative source, not a propaganda source. Then you can rely on it. The information there is more informative than to make people behave or believe in something else. Right. We move on to the next part. What evidence from the source that indicates that this battle was the last ideological conflict? We are looking at source 2C. We just go to the source and the extract. Right. Why was it last and ideological war in Africa? Right. Ideological conflict of the Cold War. We find evidence. It says was one of the final and most significant battles of the Cold War. It suggests that it was the last battle of ideological conflict of the Cold War. So it says it was one of the final and most significant battles of the Cold War. That is our response. It's an extraction question, level 1. Right, move on to the next question. Question number 2.3.2. 3.2.3 says, using the information from the source and your own knowledge, explain how the outcome at Cuito Cuanavale served as a turning point for the following countries. A turning point, you are saying that battle, it brought significant changes to the way of life of people in Angola and in South Africa. How did it bring a significant change of way of life for the people of Angola? Angolans were liberated. It was the route for liberation. Civil disputes. The civil dispute ended. That's for Angola. After the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale, it led to negotiations. It was a stalemate situation where no one was defeated, no one won the battle. And ultimately, there was need for a settled negotiation. They settled to end the dispute. They settled for ceasefire. That was a significant turning point. After years of struggle, after years of civil dispute, apparently after the battle, it brought in liberation for the people of South of Angola. They got to settle the dispute and got to achieve stability in their economy. For South Africa, how did it also bring in a significant change. In South Africa, after the battle, that was when negotiations started. Negotiated settlement started, which led to a democratic South Africa. Apartheid came to an end in 1994 because of the process of negotiation that started after the Battle of Cuito. South Africa was involved in Angola. Apparently, they could not win. They could not be defeated. They came back home. They were supposed to start a settled negotiation because of the situation in the country. The economy was crippled because of sanctions. And also, the economy was no longer viable. People were sabotaging the economy. They were boycotting white-owned businesses. The Umkhonto was destroying infrastructure. The economy was on its knees. And then what was the way forward? The only way forward was to have a negotiated settlement. And that paved way for the coming of a democratic South Africa in 1994. Right. We move on to number 2.33. Explain how Cuba can be seen as a reliable partner in the developing world through its role in the Angolan Civil War. How can Cuba be seen as a reliable partner in the developing world through its role in Angolan Civil War? But if you try to check since then, Angola can be a reliable partner in the developing world according to how it sacrificed in the Battle of Angola. If we check, it says Angola it withdrew from a situation that required extreme sacrifice from its people. So, but the fact that it offered a sacrifice, it means it's a reliable partner. It can stand on the side of the developing countries. And also, if we check, the Angolans, they send their troops. The Cubans, which is a very great sacrifice, sending troops to be physically involved in a foreign country. It means they did a very big sacrifice. It was a dedication towards the liberation of developing countries. Sending troops to Angola, it was a mere sacrifice. So it can sustain that it is a reliable partner in the developing world, according to what it sacrificed in Angola. Then the next question is saying, define the term solidarity in your own words. When we are defining solidarity in our own words, we are saying solidarity basically it's unit. Or we can say agreement or support. Among individuals. Individuals or groups with same interests. We have the same interests and we are supporting each other. We are unified because we have same ideology, we have same interests. Then we stand in solidarity. We stand strong against what we don't want. And we stand strong for what we are advocating for because we are having the same interests. We are having a shared ideology. We are having shared interests. And hence we can support each other. We can have unity. We are unified for the fact that we are having a shared interest. That is standing in solidarity. Right. What message is the leaflet conveying regarding the outcome of the Battle of Cuito? What message is the leaflet conveying? Let's look at the leaflet. So it's 2D. Right, the leaflet was designed and created by the anti-apartheid movement after the Battle of Cuito. Namibia Emergence Campaign was launched by them. anti-apartheid movement and the Namibian Solidarity Committee to campaign for free and fair elections in Namibia. Right, so what message? It says Namibia on the road to freedom. And you can see people clenching their fists and rallying for the free and fair elections for Namibia. So the question is saying, what message is the leaflet conveying regarding the outcome of the Battle of Cuito, Cuanavale? The message here is the battle paved way for liberation of Namibian people. In simple terms, it paved way for the liberation of Namibians. It shows that the battle ultimately allowed for the liberation of the people, because it's saying, if you check the heading of that particular, it says Namibia on the road to freedom. So which means the battle paved way for the freedom of the Namibians. Right. And also can talk of unity which is being represented by the clenched fists, people standing and clenching their fists and raising their arms, resembling that they are unified. It also promoted the unity of the Namibian people. Right, the next question says, refer to source 2C and source 2D. Explain how the information in source 2C supports the evidence in source 2D regarding political objectives of SWAPO for Namibia. That is a comparison question. We are supposed to figure out similarities. So we figure out similarities in the two sources by just highlighting what is in the first source in 2C and also how it is portrayed the same in source 2D. So comparing the two sources, if we check, we're comparing source 2C, which is a written source. Source 2C, the title of the source is a military study volume 2009, which talks about whatever, the Battle of Cuito, Cuanavale. And if you compare, we're also looking at the other source, it's a visual source. So when you're comparing, you're saying whatever is said here, source, like your format must be source 2A, source 2C says, right. And we want to support, this is a visual source you can see. And this one here, mainly it's showing something. So source 2C says something, and this is supported by source 2D, which shows on the image there. So you pick an idea from the first source and you show how the same idea is portrayed in the other source. We are looking at regarding the political objectives of SWAPO for Namibia. So you can pick out ideas here. For example, a peaceful outcome. You see how a peaceful outcome is portrayed in the other source there. And also you can check on South African side, and also you can also check on the Namibian side. It talks about South Africa military from Angola and Namibia, which resulted in the independence of Namibia and the negotiations with South Africa. So if you talk about the independence of Namibia, you can figure out there how it is portrayed. For example, the independence of Namibia here is indicated in this first source. And the second source is saying Namibia on the road to freedom. You can see that these two are the same. It's talking about the independence of Namibia here, and Namibia on the road to freedom is basically the same thing. It's two ideas which are portrayed in the two sources which are supporting each other. And also, if you check, it says Namibia had to be independent in the first source. Namibia had to become independent. And how is the same idea portrayed here? If you check also, it says here, over a century of colonial racist rule has been brought almost to end by the struggles of Namibian people, led by their liberation movements, the SWAPO, and by the effects of sanctions and international pressure on South Africa. Right, it says, but Namibian people want full freedom, an end to South Africa's interference in their lives. So we can compare those two. This one is saying Namibia has to be independent, and this one is saying it must bring to an end an interference into Namibian people's lives. South Africa must bring to an end the interference, which means it's supporting each other. It's talking about independence, and if South Africa is removing its interference, it means it's giving liberty to the people. That is how you compare those two sources. Then we go on to our last question, which is our paragraph question. Our paragraph question basically is explain why the outcome of the Battle of Cuito was significant. Why was it significant? It influenced the political landscape. So, why was it significant? My point, I can say, the battle was a turning point. In the region. Why am I saying it was a turning point? I'm now explaining. It began negotiated settlements. In South Africa, for example, and paved the way for free elections in Namibia. Remember, Namibia was a protectorate of South Africa, and South Africa had to withdraw from Namibia. So it paved the way for, it brought independence to the region. Then you go on to pick evidence. Like, for example, achievement of political objectives. It led to the achievement of political objectives according to the sources. Or you can talk of liberation movement in South Africa. It was the starting of lifting of the end of apartheid. Brought an end to apartheid as evidence from the sources. So you pick evidence, then you support that it was a turning point. It brought significant changes to the region. The fact that apartheid came to an end, it was a significant change to South Africans. The fact that South Africa got to have a democratic elections in 1994, it was a significant change. The fact that Namibia had to do free and fair elections after the withdrawal of South Africa as a taking it as its protectorate, it was a significant change to the region. So we try to figure out evidences, and we support that by the given source evidence as evidence from the sources. Or we can also pick the fact that the source D is saying Namibia on the road to freedom. This is evidence from source 2D. It's giving us evidence that Namibia is on the road to freedom, which is also a significant change, which was never expected, but it came as a result of the battle. Right. So basically, that is how you answer the paragraph question. Right, we'll go on to the essay questions and try to figure out how we are supposed to answer those questions. Right, I'll just elaborate on the lines of argument that you can use. Then the points are clear. Essay points are always the same. The essay points are always the same. But what I need to elaborate on here is just I need to elaborate on the line of argument. Then I'll just highlight on some ideas that you can use in the essay. Right, question number 4, it says, the United States of America, USA, as a superpower, was able to defeat the Viet Cong. This is where our controversy is. Was able to defeat the Viet Cong in Vietnam War from 1963 to 1975. Right, that is our statement. Do you agree with the statement? Support your line of argument with relevant evidence. Right, do you agree with the statement? Remember, when you're answering your question, we need a line of argument. I'll elaborate on the introduction, what you need to do with the introduction in introducing your essay. Right, we need the 3 steps of the introduction. Number 1, we want an answer, or this one. The US as a superpower was able to defeat. We must use our historical understanding of the war. What was the result of the war? We know without doubt that the USA was defeated. So there's no way we can agree with this statement here, because it says the US was able to defeat, meaning to say it won the war. And yet we know the results of the war were in favor of the Viet Cong. So we cannot agree with this. So our answer or our line of argument definitely must be in disagreement. Or one can disagree. This is our answer. You must always have an answer first. Then the reasons. Why? You give general reasons. The reasons that you can give here, why are you disagreeing? You can say the USA relied on conventional methods in the war. How were they? They were ineffective. And hence, they could not win that war. What about the Viet Cong? The Viet Cong used non-conventional methods. And how did they impact in the war? They were very effective. And leading to their ultimate win. You are giving general reasons why you are disagreeing with the statement. We disagree because we know that America was relying on conventional methods. They were using methods from the book, and those methods did not work for the Viet Cong. While is the Viet Cong were using non-conventional going to present? What is the essay going to prove? This essay is going to further elaborate on the tactics in the war, in the Vietnam War. Or you just elaborate by showing what historical evidence are you going to use in that particular essay. Then your introduction is contextualized. Without this, your introduction will not be contextualized and you won't be able to have a line of argument that you're going to support. Then don't worry about background information. Then you go to your points. I know you have a variety of points that you can use. The points won't change. They're always the same. You talk of the Viet Cong strategies, like you talk of the strategic Hamlet. You explain what kind of strategy was it, and you indicate that it failed. Why? Because they could not separate, for example, the villagers and the guerrillas. It was difficult for them to know who was the guerrilla and who was the villager, who was to go into the strategic hamlet and who was not to go there. You look at American strategies like Rolling Thunder, Operation Rolling Thunder. Yes, you look at the chemical warfare, the usage of napalm. You explain and how it led to the blaming of America and apparently the withdrawal of the method into the fighting battlefield. You look at Operation Rangent, and you can look at the 2 chemicals that were used. You look at Agent Orange for the forests. You look at Agent Blue, a herbicide. How did it impact? You explain based on those strategies. You try to figure out. You talk about America sending young and inexperienced soldiers, undermining the Viet Cong, and those soldiers were massacred. You talk about the influence of the media, how it impacted in the war. It was a televised war, how it led to tension in America. the citizens. You look at the My Lai massacre. How it impacted. You look at protests in the US against the government and apparently the withdrawal. You look at Vietnamization. Those are some of the points, but not limited to those. You must be able to develop them into full paragraphs. Then you go to the side of the Viet Cong. You also look at the strategies that were used by the Viet Cong. Mainly, you look at the guerrilla warfare. You elaborate on the tactics of guerrilla warfare that they were using, the hit and run tactics. How did it impact equipment to fight with in the war? You look at the usage of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, how it assisted the Vietnamese in the fight. You look at support from peasants, how the peasant farmers supported them. While they were promising them that if we go under communism, we're going to be afforded a right to own land. You look at landmines, how they impacted. You look at not wearing uniform, them fighting without a uniform, how it impacted on their fight in the battlefield. So if you see, there are so many points that you can write about. You can elaborate on so many points, and you must indicate when you are linking your points to show that it was an effective method on the side of the Viet Cong because they won the war. On the side of the US, you indicate that it was an ineffective method which led to the downfall of the US in the war. Then you tie up your argument in the conclusion. That is basically what you are supposed to do for that particular essay. Those are some of the ideas that you can use in defending your line of argument. Remember, you must adopt a line of argument that you are able to support and defend throughout the argument so that your argument does not wander around. You must not lose direction as you are presenting your essay. It must have focus. It must have direction. We must know your line of the story and not confuse ourselves as we go through your essay. It must have direction. You must not wander around. You must have a fixed line of argument that you are able to defend as you present your facts in the essay. That is basically what you are supposed to focus on for that particular essay from the case study from Vietnam. And always remember, your paragraphs must be precise. Start with a clear opening statement when you are introducing your paragraph. It must make a clear statement to show what you want to explain in particular paragraph. Right, let's look at the other paragraph, the other question. This other question on the case study for independent Africa, it says Mobutu Sese Seko was attempted to reduce Congo's dependence on Western powers through his political and economic policies. He tried to reduce Congo's dependence through his political and economic policies. Critically discuss this statement. Right. So it's a critical discussion. The difference here is we must have a dual line of argument. It must be two line of argument to show that he attempted and he also could not succeed in his attempt. So you pick a line of argument, your main line of argument, according to your understanding. Would we say Mobutu was successful in attempting to reduce Congo's dependence on the Western powers? Did he ultimately win off Congo after independence from depending on the Western powers? That is unlikely. Much of his support was coming from the Western powers, was coming from the USA. He never desisted from economic aid from the USA. So you take that as a line of argument. Mobutu Sese Seko failed to reduce Congo's dependence as the main line. You take the other line, however, he made some significant attempts to try and minimize his dependence on Western powers. That is a dual line of argument. Then you give reasons. Why are you saying he failed to reduce the dependence? He adopted a capitalistic economy, which he could not manage. An economy relying on one product, which was very difficult for the economy of Congo to sustain on its own. He could not manage the economy effectively, and hence he could not desist from asking for aid. Then on the other side, you also look on the positives. How successful he was in attempting to reduce. What did he do to try and reduce the dependence on the support from the Western powers as general reasons, then you give an elaboration of what you're going to present. Then the points that you can use then for that particular essay, the points still remain the same. You look at those points and you try to link them to whether it was an effective attempt to reduce dependence or it ultimately worsened the situation and prompted the need for foreign aid. You look at economic policies and political policies, like you look at him having a one-part state and also him rising as a dictator. It's political. You also indicate some policies like kleptocracy. You look at also policies like Zairinization. You look at also some of the policies that he indicated he carried. You talk of his adoption, nationalization of foreign-owned businesses and the ultimate failure of those businesses. And also, you can also try to talk of retrocession, where he tried to give back the businesses that he had taken, he had nationalized, and tried to give back to the owners. You can also talk of the adoption of capitalistic states. Corruption, talk of nepotism, how it impacted. So all those things, you try to talk about those things and try to highlight how they reduced dependence or how they failed to reduce dependence on the Western world, on the economy of Congo. Then apparently at the end, you tie up your argument. You tie up your argument by either reaffirming key points or you tie the argument in a way to show that you have critically discussed in your presentation. So basically, that's how you're going to attack that essay question. Right, that takes us to the end of our discussion. That takes us to the end of our memo discussion for this particular paper. We hope to meet in other discussions to follow, and we will always try to assist you wherever there is a need for assistance in history. As usual, your host will meet in other programs. Thank you for watching. Good day, learners. Welcome to our memo discussion for history, paper 1 for the Prelim exam of Gauteng province. Right. We are going to go through the set of questions, and we are going to also try to explain the possible responses to the given set of questions. So we see our paper, that is our paper 1, which is 3 hours and which is 150 marks. As usual, it's a choice of either two source-based questions